Multicultural Club at Greenfield Community College. The Multicultural Club and guests today would like to share some experiences with racism on campus and offer some helpful suggestions that may solve this problem. My guests today are Naomi Blasini, Mara Hogan, the UMass graduate student, Ella Washington, a Greenfield Community College Multicultural Club student, Willie Reed, another Greenfield Community College student, and Ronnie Glenn, Greenfield Community College student. We would like to start, Naomi, with the question, do you feel racism is a problem on campus?
Yes.
Why do you feel racism is a problem on campus?
Because it makes a lot of people uncomfortable. I mean, you ask people if there's racism on campus, they feel uncomfortable in answering them.
Okay. Mara, I know that you don't go to GCC and you're a UMass student, but can you share any observation of racism at GCC?
I know a lot of folks who do go to GCC. I'm actually a neighbor of the college. I've had an opportunity to be there for various reasons. And I think when I hear other comments about the blatantness or the question of is there an issue of racism on campus, I feel that, basically that there is. I mean, it's unavoidably obvious in the sense that there's a very limited amount of minority faculty, a very limited amount of minority students on campus, and apparently the integration of students and faculty, minority and majority, is, it's not happening. So to me, there is a problem.
Ella, can you share with us on that?
Well, I know that there is racism on campus. I've been a GCC student for 4 years now, and I myself have experienced racism. And when you put it to the question as being blatant or not, those people who feel that it's not blatant is because they're not in my shoes, or they're not in people of color's shoes, so they have a channel to where they can ignore it or not wish to see it or to quote it as being blatant. But to me, it is blatant. It's blatant when you have no representatives, or when you are in a classroom and a conversation turns into a racist comments that maybe other people don't feel that's racism, but I find that it's on campus and it's in society, so how can it not be?
Willie Reed?
Well, there is racism on GCC campus, and the type of racism that I experienced has been in isolated incidents. And I think that it's probably due to the environment. Now look at the people that I was dealing with, and what it was going to be, and it will continue to be in that realm.
Mr. Lonnie Glenn?
Yes, I think whenever you have diversified groups of people assembled in one place, you're sure to have an element of racism. I think if we don't acknowledge that, then we deceive ourselves. Again, it goes back to the question of how blatant this issue is on campus. Probably should not be the issue, just the fact that it does exist. I think if we can accept that as the truth, then we may be able to do something positive toward diminishing the possibility that it inhibits us to grow as people.
Okay. Now, I've heard a couple of you mention about blatant racism. Is blatant a term that you're hearing is saying that there is not blatant racism on campus, but that means that the racism that's there is not worth talking about?
When I say that it's blatant, it's not that I'm saying that it's not open. It is blatant to me. To me, things that are said in classrooms, to me, that's blatant. to me, no representatives that I can, you know, feel comfortable with that represents my race or that I can feel akin to me, that's blatant. To me, you know, the lack of integration within the students, be it in the cafeteria or they sit out to the side, to me, that's blatant. And so, to me, the faculty's ignorance about the issue of racism and how to handle it in class, to me, that's blatant. But I can understand where the other students who are not of color would feel that it's not blatant. They don't have to look at it. I do. So to me, it's blatant. So for me, it's not a question of whether it's blatant or not. It is.
Mr. Glenn, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, I think that, for lack of a better word, I think racism is blatant at GCC. I think that, and you would have to be a person of color to be able to identify with that is a fact. If you have a problem in regards to yourself as a student and the faculty, you don't have a person of color that you can go to and tell them of your desperation. The subjects that are being taught, they're not necessarily subjects that's geared to people of diversified backgrounds. That's another example of racism. And the faculty members themselves, just not having people of color to relate to. Monies dispensed on campus for minorities, it certainly suggests that there's racism on campus. Anyone who's had to appeal to the institution for services to be rendered to minorities, my experience has always been that there's little money given to that institution for its minorities. That's racism.
Anybody else would like to share anything?
Only that I think when people are asked whether racism is blatant, I think they're looking for graffiti on the walls. They're looking, you know, in the bathroom stalls, they're looking, and that's what they consider blatant racism. But to me, the vagueness of it is what's really blatant. That's what really stands out, you know, my experience.
Okay, I think the subtleness of racism at GCC is very painful to deal with as a GCC student. When I hear the students and the professors say, well, I don't think it's blatant racism at GCC, I feel that they don't understand, like Ella was saying, they can't put themselves in my body, because when I see racism, it is blatant because it's obvious to me.
Absolutely.
And it's not as obvious to some of the white kids that are there, some of the white instructors. And this is primarily what this type of program is to do, to let them know how we're feeling about the racism on campus. Not to harm them, but to educate them. Now, at this point, we're going to take a look at some other students' viewpoints, and we'll be back to discuss that.
Being Jewish, I've heard the Jewish jokes, you know, and the stereotypes of, well, they're Jewish, they're cheap. Somebody saying something to that effect without realizing, well, she's Jewish, what does this mean? I have seen, I believe, what can be seen as racism as far as hiring practices on campus, subtle things, and also people that I know of color feel people have been racist towards them, and if they feel it's happening, then it's happening.
I don't think it's, I haven't seen any kind of racist acts or any kind of blatant racism at the school at all.
So I was in a classroom where we were talking about the different groups that have migrated into the area, and there were several students who expressed a lot of bitterness over the fact that these new immigrants, a lot of them South Asians, and a lot of new Hispanic immigrants were getting all sorts of financial assistance to go to school and to live elsewhere. The students that were complaining were white, middle class, struggling people. And the discussion got very emotional, where people got very angry at those Cambodian students or those, and the Mexican students or the Puerto Rican students. And that's where they left it. They just left it at that. They were very angry.
I don't think blatantly I have observed that. But I think that racism on the campuses, and on any campus or other campuses that I've been on, is a much more subtle thing than that. And in that way, it's probably more destructive than it would be if it were something that one could say, oh yes, I saw this person taking a racist stand. It doesn't happen that way.
I do a lot of listening to people talking in corners and stuff as I walk by, and yes, I've walked by bad jokes or racial slurs and that kind of thing. So yes, I've observed it.
No, and I actually every day I see, the foreign students and all coming through, and they're all very nice. I like every one of them.
I feel like this interview with me in particular, I feel like I haven't looked into it or felt enough about the issue, and I don't really feel like I can respond adequately.
I haven't seen any blatant racism. I haven't seen people being harassed because of the color of their skin or because of their origin, where they come from. But what I have seen is that some people that they just keep to themselves a little bit. That Hispanics would hang out with Hispanics, and that blacks would be attracted to blacks, and that whites would be attracted to whites. That there could be more interaction. That's what I've seen on this campus.
Hi, I'm Dwayne Burlington. We're here with Naomi Blessini, a GCC Multicultural Club student, Myra Hogan, UMass graduate student, Ella Washington, GCC Multicultural Club student, Willie Reed, GCC Multicultural Club student, and Lonnie Glenn, a GCC Multicultural Club student. All right, I'd like to discuss now the question, have you ever observed or experienced racism on campus? I'd like to start with you, Naomi.
Hi.
Hi.
My experience has been that there's, in classroom discussions around racism, a tremendous resistance to talk about it. People get very uncomfortable, and sometimes things escalate to hostility. That's been my experience.
With the hostility?
Yeah.
Myra, have you any experiences or observations you'd like to share?
Sure. Well, as you said before, I'm a UMass student instead of a GCC student, so I don't have personal experiences of what it's like to be in class at GCC, although many of the people here on the panel are friends of mine, and I've had a chance to listen to their situations, experiences that they've had in class, and not all of them have been positive. A lot of them have been blatantly racist experiences, or blatant experiences of racism, maybe I should say it that way. But I know that I've experienced the whole phenomena of racism in almost every situation I've ever been in where it comes up, and I don't see that Greenfield Community College would be any different than any other place, and that it's an issue that's difficult, painful to deal with, and that a lot of times people, instead of really knuckling down and dealing with it, they try to avoid it, and then it becomes a problem.
Yeah, I agree. I see that happening at GCC. Ella, would you like to share with us an experience or an observation?
Well, I've both experienced and observed racism on campus. Most of this has been classroom racism, and you know, during discussions, students have said in the class that I am in that their grandparents had slaves and that they were very good to their slaves. And I feel like there was no sensitivity to that I was in the room. I've had a communication course where a girl wanted to do her speech on the Ku Klux Klan. I was the only African American in that class, and I couldn't imagine why she what would she have to say about the Ku Klux Klan with me sitting right there. And I had an option to myself, because I didn't feel like I could go to the instructor, to either make a choice whether when she gets up to speak, if I'm going to leave or if I'm going to stay. And fortunately for me, she didn't do it. She changed her mind at the last minute. So for whatever reason, I feel like she must have noticed that I was there. I've also been in a class where an instructor was instructing the class, and he went on to talk about Congress and how if you were elected to Congress, you'd have to move to Washington, D.C., and he prefaced moving to Washington, D.C. with that there's mostly black people there, there's poor education and high crime and drugs. And
now,
I'm the only...
He was prefacing that for you?
He prefaced it for the class in his teaching lecture and telling them if you made a choice to go to Congress, you might want to think about not going to move to Washington, but commuting back and forth because of the situation there.
Oh, okay.
I was in a class where, same class, the instructor also said that in the course of his lecture that he always fancied, he was talking about the difference between the blacks and the white in this certain town, and how he didn't feel that it was fair that there should be a line of separation in the very wealthy and the very poor, poor being a black. And he said, I always fancied having a whip, but I feel that that's not right. And I'm sitting in the front row, and all of a sudden this hot heat just came over me, and I didn't know what to say. I didn't know, and this was in the same thing with not moving to Washington, and I was really lost for words. I went to instructors that I thought would understand the situation. I went to my sociology instructor, who was really helpful in helping me to deal with it and some options and what I might take, because I felt like he was open and could partially understand what I was going through. But I didn't feel, I had other instructors tell me, you may not want to say anything. He's been here for years and they're not going to do anything about it. And so I feel like there wasn't anyone that was there that could adequately help me out. And that was a few years ago, and the situation hasn't changed any, because my husband is now a student, and he had in his class just a month ago a student say that he felt that black people made perfect slaves. And fortunate enough for him, his instructor is very open to what's going on with racism and is an advocate in fighting racism. So she was able to let the classrooms know that in that particular person that was not right, that was racism, and she's still trying to find ways. She's even having a hard time on how she should deal with it. And she's always at the racism workshop, and she's always trying to teach multicultural stuff, and so even she's witnessing it in her class as we sit. So, you know, it's still there. It hasn't changed much.
So there are a few instructors at Greenfield Community College that are looking for a change.
I feel like there is a few, but not enough to help the few who are trying to do something. There's not enough for them to be supported in their efforts in trying to fight racism. So they turn to their students like us to see in what ways can they bring this in class and have this issue dealt with.
Yeah, because it is difficult for us to deal with as black people. I know it's difficult, but it must be tremendously difficult for those who are of the Caucasian persuasion to have to say, hey, this is racism, and we have to work with it, and to tell their colleagues makes it doubly hard.
Yeah, it made a big difference for my husband that she was aware of what was going on and did not ignore it. I didn't have that opportunity for someone to acknowledge it when I was taking courses, but it made a big difference for him and how he dealt with having that said.
Okay, thank you, Ellen. Willie?
Yeah, I have experienced that type of racism. Experienced that type of racism in a class with a professor that talked about speech patterns between the so-called upper middle class and the poor class. And my way of dealing with that, I went to talk to him about the situation, and his way of dealing with me was to tell me to leave his office. And I do think that this type of racism was probably due from his cultural upbringing and his economic status. And the U.S. is a country that promotes that type of racism, and it's not applicable for professors to do, to teach in that type of manner, to use them type of terms while they teach in class.
So you're saying it's not just a black and white issue, it's an economic issue as well?
Racism is an economic issue. Okay. And when you come from that type of class structure, you look down on the ones that don't hold the type of positions that you do.
Thank you.
That was interesting.
That is interesting.
Very interesting. My personal experience, I've been with GCC for a year and a half. And last year, I experienced formal racism that was quite overt. As a matter of fact, it nearly drove me from the institution. Naomi was in one of my classes where I had a confrontation with a professor who literally tried to drive me from her classroom. And if it weren't for her supervisor who called her on her attitude towards me, this woman refused to work with me on any level. She went to all extremes. She had me rewriting my work, really trying to discourage me. Every paper I would submit, she would put the lowest possible grade on that paper that she could put. But I had a determination to stay in that class because I perceived it as her problem and not my problem. And fortunately, her supervisor told her that she would have to work with me, that her excuses were not valid. And that was my first experience with this quote-unquote racism problem at GCC. I'm also inclined to believe that it is not a racist institution, and there are folks at GCC who believe in a fairness kind of thinking toward all of the students at GCC, and I'm glad about that.
Okay, I'd like to thank you all for your comments. We'll return to discuss another topic shortly.
Well, there aren't too many of them. From what I can see, there probably could be a few more.
So you'd like to see a few more?
I think that a few more might help out over here.
Okay.
Are there any?
There's a few, yes.
Very few. Yeah, no, this is a fairly, the one thing is that there's an awful lot of women models, and that's good. I mean, that's a positive on this campus. But in terms of multicultural or racial representation, no, there's not enough. I don't believe. Well, if you looked at that, the idea of models in terms of more faculty, unfortunately, that's because of Massachusetts' economic or financial crunch. There's not a whole lot to tell you to come and work in Greenfield at Greenfield Community College. You don't have a steady job if you come. There are lots of problems that faculty of this college are running into, and to try to attract minorities into this situation is pretty rough. There's not a whole lot of things to ask them to come for.
But I don't think, and I know as a matter of fact, that this is not due to a lack of will on the part of the administration or on the part of other faculty members. It's very difficult to find, recruit minority faculty and administrators because they are so much in demand. And everyone is fighting to get them, essentially. And there just aren't enough people to go around so far. And of course, that's the fault of history and our educational system. And we need very, very much to educate more minorities so that we can have role models. We need male and female role models, and we need role models from every group that is represented in our country.
First of all, you have to take into account, why are we hiring this person? Are we hiring them on merit and experience, or are we hiring them just because of their color, their race, or their sex? Hiring a person just because of their color, race, or sex is demeaning to everyone. But hiring them on their basis of merit and their skill level is what everything should be judged on. But by the same token, to hire some minorities to get them on the go, more or less give them a fresh start, give them the start that a lot of minorities never ever get. Because I know there are some minorities out there that do face racism, and sometimes all it takes is a good start and they're all set. One chance. And I think we should give everyone a chance.
I don't believe that minority instructors are adequately represented on campus, or staff administration. I don't believe there are enough minorities on campus, period. And the college curriculum reflects that.
Okay, Naomi. How would your reaction be to the question, do you think there are adequate minority role models on campus?
No, there aren't. I mean, not only there are not enough role models in faculty, but in areas such as student government, there aren't enough people.
Good point. Okay, Ella?
Well, no, there's not enough role models in terms of faculty. The role models that I look at when I am on campus is I look towards each other, like Dwayne, like Lonnie, like Naomi, like Lawanza, the other students, and they're so busy, and that's not their, in a way that's their place because we have a Ken, but there should be represented someone that we could go to, and that's not adequately represented. Not only, the only role model that I get on campus is once in a great while, where if they bring a speaker, and this has only happened to me once, in the class that is African American, that is talking about something that I can relate to. Otherwise, there's really no one that I can really relate to except for my other peers. And that's it.
How do you feel about that, Mr. Reed? No? There's nothing else to say about it. It's just not enough professors, instructors, that's it. All right. Lonnie?
Well, I'm recalling a statement that was made probably prior to us assembling ourselves here on this set. But someone made a statement in reference to dollars and cents and being able to draw minorities to GCC campus. I think in this day and age, when we have an economic crisis as we do, people are looking for work. And so I, in no wise, would believe that this institution does not have monetary compensation enough to put minorities to work. I think that just undermines the whole educational system to say we don't have money to pay minorities. I think the institution ought to go out of their way to increase their minority population as far as professors go. As Naomi mentioned, people on the student body should incorporate a true perspective of the people there at the college. And thank God for the Multicultural Club, who's doing, so much to bring these issues about. I don't think that the issue should be on dollars and cents. I think they need to renew their way of thinking and look at a means to draw people in. And I'm sure if they did that, they could come up with a means to do so.
Okay, thank you. Myra, would you like to add anything?
Sure. You know, I can speak from having been to last spring's commencement ceremony and seeing the number of professors there and remembering that there were maybe, well, from my memory, I mean, I know there are more, but not very many more. I only saw one, other than, I mean, I know that there are a couple of, at least a couple of Jewish American professors on campus, but in terms of people of color, I can only remember one. And, you know, I feel like, you know, to me, again, it goes back to the question of if there is an issue, there's no doubt that there's an issue. I mean, if that's all you can see, then there has to be an issue with that, with minority representation.
Right.
I agree with Lonnie in terms of the whole idea that somehow faculty are not, or candidates for faculty are not available. Where are they looking?
Well, that's true. Candidates are available, and I know this. I've sat on a couple of search committees with the college. I think it goes back to racism, with that deep ingrained racism, whereas the people who are doing the hiring are the people who are working at the college, and they would much rather work with people like themselves. And that's where a lot of us, or minority perspectives, get ruled out in the hiring process. And I think until we start having the healing process of getting away from the racism, you can't have the adequate representation for minorities.
Absolutely.
Well, you know what, too, not only just faculty. I mean, I would like to see somebody represent administratively. There's a lot of administrative positions that, I mean, it's not like we can't add and, you know, there's no minorities. I mean, one, they got one in an administrative position, but that still is not enough. I mean, there's a lot of people, GCC is a college where people start out late in life. You have young people, teenagers who have had babies, who are just now coming to the college, and they need the inspiration from someone that they can relate to. If they have this big old business course, and they have the BMA course, is it? BMA program. And they don't see, for them to be influenced or motivated to want to do these courses, they need to see someone in those positions to drive them to want to go further. And they really don't see that. You know, I don't see it, and I know they don't see it. So, you know, administratively, they're not represented either.
Well, and also whenever you start talking about the whole idea that people are not being hired because they're not like us, well, what does that mean exactly? I mean, they are like any of the rest of anybody else in the sense, I mean, people of color are not so unlike us that they're not equally qualified to do the work. They're more than equally in demand at the school in the sense that they eat and breathe and sleep and do all the same things that anybody else does. I mean, you know, it's the whole idea that they're not like us. I mean, that's one of the comments made earlier was that it's hard to approach people because they're not like us, or like people stick with like people. And to me, it's like, this person is my very best friend, and she is like me in so many zillion million ways that the whole idea that the color of our skin is different, or that our cultural background is different, that's more of an enrichment to our relationship than there's those two perspectives there, right, to enrich that relationship, rather than the fact that, well, she's too unlike me, I can't talk to her. You know, I don't know how to talk to her. Hello is a good start.
Yeah. Well, that is a very good start. And the next segment of the program, we're going to be discussing some suggestions that might get us to a more workable situation within the college and the community within the college.
A potential solution is a hard one, especially when it comes to racism.
Well, the minority groups need to feel, a sense of place that they belong here. And I don't think they do. I mean, it's sort of evident in the cafeteria. They just sit amongst themselves in the group, and then it's predictable. There's a section of the cafeteria where they always sit, and they don't really move beyond that, and interact with other students from other cultures.
I'm teaching an ethnic literature course next semester. This is one small way to do something along those lines. It's going to include Asian American writing, African American writing, Native American writing, and a study of their cultures. And in that way, I think that in a small way that bridges the gap between people by knowing those things. Because racism really is ignorant.
In terms of being active, I think it would be, we could do more in terms of outside people coming in, lectures or workshops, or I think things like last semester when they did the multicultural exchange of 4 different seminars and stuff, those kinds of things can be of help in terms of educating, getting people to look at their own understandings and perceptions without judgment of that first, and then be able to change some attitudes before we judge people's behaviors.
Would they rather be by themselves, or wouldn't they rather?
I feel like when you're sitting in the lunchroom that students on their own separate, and I don't feel like it's like it's a racist, oh, you can't sit with me kind of thing. I just feel like they know who they're like, and they separate automatically. Speaking Spanish people, I sit with my friends, and I don't feel like, we're judging and leaving each other out. But if there could be some way, and I don't really know what form it would take, but something could definitely bring us together.
I think a lot is being done already to improve the unity on campus. For example, just a little while ago, we had International Students' Day, which was very interesting because I personally also had a chance to meet with other students from other nations. Things like that, I think, cultural diversity activities would be very helpful. Having people be exposed to other cultures and where they come from, and help them understand that there is more out there than just the United States.
I think a lot of people, when they hear the word racism, automatically become defensive. That's not me, without realizing it's okay, you've been raised this way, but now it's time to open your eyes and work on it, that whether you realize it or not, there are racist tendencies within you, however slight, to fear for whatever reasons, and it's not your fault if that's how you were brought up, that's what you've seen, that's all you know. We need education for people to say, okay, that is in me, and that doesn't make me a bad person, but now what can I do about that to make sure that doesn't carry on?
Absolutely.
Mr. Glenn, can you offer any suggestions?
Well, I think that things that would probably, one of the things that I can think of that will improve the situation around racism at GCC is already happening. It's happening through the Multicultural Club. I think that if this club continues to be active and do the things that they are doing, it certainly promote a greater relationship among the students and faculty, because a lot of times I look around and these professors are darting in and out, and they see what's happening, and I haven't seen any appearance on those faces to say that this is disdain. It's something that they approve of. And so I think the efforts of the Multicultural Club, for one, is going to be very, very helpful. And I guess it goes back to a former statement that I made around their hiring practices. Minorities need to see people of other color in higher positions, because then the statement there is, I'm educating myself that I might one day attain these higher positions. I think the institution needs to look at that strongly, because GCC is a small school, but there's a lot of areas housed within that institution that are credible areas of employment. And all we need to do is see that those areas are obtainable, even at GCC. And that would be helpful for them to look at.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Reed, I think the key is itself. It's what GCC stands for, and it stands for education. And one of the ways that I feel that you can bridge racism is through education. I think we need more classes that's dealing with minorities, whether they're Asian, whether they're African American, whether they're Cambodian. We need to be taught that type of history, and that's just not being done on a lot of levels. Education, to me, is the key to bridging the gap, and if you don't influence that, what good is education? Thank you. Ms. Washington?
Well, I think one of the things that could promote racial unity on campus is that faculty members, and it's my understanding that they're going to have a mandated meeting, need to go to those workshops and deal with their own racism, because unless they do that, they really can't understand. They'll keep their blinders on, they'll be defensive at everything that we bring up. They won't be able to adequately help us with situations that we're in, so they really need to deal with their own racism. And a lot of those faculties that, I refer to is the white Anglo-Saxon male, because they dominate a lot of things. And we have racism workshops, and everyone else comes except for the white male. And it really shows where they're not interested in this on campus. And I think that's one way to do it. Another way that I think that they need to do it is that people really need to start making friends and get to know black people. Like Myra said earlier, I value my friendship with her because it wasn't easy for us to, and I talk about this all the time, that it was not easy for us to be best friends. We came through a lot of things that had to do with racial issues, but we talked about them, we hashed them out, and I wouldn't trade I learned so much from her, and she learned a lot from me. And there are a few whites on campus that I can call my friends, and I value those relationships because they are so few. And the other thing I could say, there was one instructor who took the time out to call me at work when I was at GCC for a year. The situation had gotten so bad and she wanted so much to do something about it, and she called me and she came to my job and met with me for lunch. And she came all the way out of her busy schedule to Terrace Falls to have lunch with me and talk about it and see what can she do, and let me know that she was there to help in any way she could. And I think more instructors need to do that. I don't think they can do it until they deal with their own racism.
Thank you.
Oh boy, there's a lot that can be done, and I think mainly what Ella is saying right away is that, and I think it was mentioned in some of the other comments that I've heard, on the tape, that folks need to be willing to accept the fact that we've been raised, white folks and everybody, but white folks are particularly susceptible to racism because we've been raised with racist attitudes. We've been raised in a society that promotes it, and we have not had to deal with it because we were on top, basically. We were standing on everybody else. And I think that now that people that have been underneath us, so to speak, just in terms of being politically oppressed, that they're starting to stand up. And so now it's our turn to have to deal with it. And we need to deal with it now instead of putting it off until later. One of the things I think is really important is that I think people need to be willing to be beginners. And I think one of the hard things about it is that when you're talking, like Will was talking about bringing in information and studying the experiences of different cultures, well, that means that you have to start from scratch if you don't know anything about that. And people have to be willing to do that, to, okay, go back, start at the beginning, and to learn it. I know I'm a graduate student studying to teach English as a second language, and hopefully I will be teaching students the age and a lot of minorities, that the same age as that go to Greenfield Community College, young adults. And one of the things that I think is really important as a language learner, when people come into this country, or when people start to step out of their own culture and start to step into somebody else's and to take that risk, they have to start from the beginning. They don't necessarily have all the familiarity that they want or that they're comfortable with. And they have to be willing to step out and be willing to do that in order to learn and grow. And I think that that's equally important for white Americans, to be willing to step out of their familiar, to learn and grow. And so.
Naomi, do you have anything to share with us?
Yes. One of the things that's been happening on campus, notice we had a couple of weeks ago our Latin series, where we had a lot of music coming to the college. We have the perfect spot for it. The cafeteria is the only place where we all meet as a college community at once around the same time of day. And there's a lot of opportunity there to introduce culture and traditions to everyone in the form of music and theater. And that sort of, that approach is not as intimidating to people. It's not as, you're not being confronted with, are you a racist or are you not a racist? And it gives everyone a chance to explore. I mean, when we had the folks that were doing the Latin American series, the cafeteria was full of people. And people were really getting into the music. They were really starting to understand where a lot of the Hispanic students on campus come from, the things that they bring with them, their traditions. And I think we need to be doing more of that, and we can do more of that with students participating in the decision-making, as to what comes into campus. The Student Senate makes a lot of those decisions. And
No, not Student Senate. Student Life, Student Activity Council.
okay. And well, that's where we need more representation with minority students.
Okay. I appreciate all of your input. I have a couple of things to say about suggestions. I agree with all of you, but I still have to go with the basic racism. Until we can get people to understand that it's okay to say, hey, I may be a racist or I am a racist. And I'm not going to say, see, I told you, you were a racist. I'm going to say, okay, now that you're willing to work with that, how can I help you? And if we can convey that to not just the people at GCC, but everyone that has a racist problem, I think we can get and move a lot more faster towards our goal. And that's a major suggestion that I have, is that we work strongly together to get this racism thing out in the open. That's why we wanted to do the show as a club. We discussed it. A lot of people are very uncomfortable around campus talking about it. We went around campus last week trying to get interviews from students. You've seen a few today. But that's just a few out of perhaps 30 people we asked, because the issue is so touchy. And if we can get that issue from being a touchy issue to something that, hey, yeah, we can talk about it. Like people a few years ago, 20, 30 years ago, wouldn't talk about sex the way it's being discussed now. But now we can openly discuss sexual issues. And if we can get the racism up to that level, we will be moving toward unity. I think.
I wanted to say too, you know, who's ever filming this or watching this film, is that people need to know that we are not animals. We are not going to beat them up. They need to get rid of the stereotypes so that they can approach us when they do acknowledge that they are racist or they have issues about racism that they want to talk to, or Dwayne, like yourself, because you're a big guy. It doesn't mean you're going to pounce someone as soon as they walk up to you. And I think a lot of that comes from stereotypes that they assume that we can't talk to them once they acknowledge that they might have a racial issue. So,
yeah, and the other thing too is that when you start dealing, I mean, you know, from a personal perspective, anytime I've ever dealt with my racism with anybody, and I know that one of the more memorable experiences that I had was with Ella and another fella who was, you know, a big guy like Dwayne, and, you know, very assertive in terms of his manner and that sort of thing, and it was, in some ways it was intimidating to deal with that, but I remember by the time, whenever I could just like break through that barrier, and it's a painful bit when you're like holding on and trying to keep from having to deal with it, and you're not sure what's on the other side, then you brace yourself for it, and the more you brace yourself, the more painful it is. But if you just, if you let those barriers down and you really start to deal with it, the closeness that you feel with those people who've helped you through a particular obstacle that's keeping you from growing in your life, it brings you together. That's what brings people together, when you can share your experiences.
Absolutely, I think so. And if I just might add a word, I think I don't have total insight into a Caucasian perspective. And I doubt that, on a very serious note, if a Caucasian could have my black perspective, because you have to be an Indian, know what it is to walk in an Indian's moccasins, to be able to be sensitive to those issues. And I think there's just 2 points, and I want to quickly approach them both. I think one, whereupon Dwayne said we need to talk about it, because as long as we don't approach it, it will continue. So that means that we have to be able to bring it out in the open so that we can look at it. Whether it's done on a conscious level or subconscious level, it's nevertheless, it is present. And I think, Myra, as you pointed out, if you can feel the ferocity in a person who approached this subject, if you feel that based upon what we say as minorities, then you can almost venture to feel how we must feel having to live with that. We feel twice the oppression, twice the weight. And I think just having this opportunity to approach it, verbalize it, and then let others hear how we feel as a small group. We're a small group who represent a large number of people. Perhaps we can say something or do something to strike a sensitive nerve in our counterparts to say, okay, let's take a look at it and do something positive about it. We are in the 90s, approaching the 21st century really quickly, and time is at hand.
That's right.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
Would anybody else like to contribute anything? No? Okay. Yes?
Of course you do.
Go ahead.
Oh, there's just a thought that keeps running through my head. Is that we also have to remember amongst ourselves to keep an open heart, that it is a struggle. We're going to come across some very high walls, some people who we just are not going to be able to reach. We can't let that discourage us. To look at this really from a humanistic point of view.
That's absolutely right.
Stick with it.
That's true. We can't become the enemy.
Right.
We don't want to be the enemy.
That's right.
Absolutely not.
That's right.
Okay, I'd like to thank all of you for your comments. I'd like to say, to end this program, that the administration at Greenfield Community College has been behind our effort as a club on campus. The administration at Greenfield Community College has been behind our efforts as a club on the college campus. And we want this to be an educational experience. We don't want to be blaming white America for anything. We just want to help educate the college community. Thank you very much.